Standing in God's love, not letting fear get the best of me this morning. That's what I'm doing. My name is Tabitha Cox. We're relatively newer to the White Lake area, and we're going to get a little deep and serious for a little bit, but I'm sure we'll all make it through. So, the only two memories I have of my parents together involve physical abuse. Scenes so vivid, I could step into them now and still tell you the details. My parents were divorced when I was 4. Unlike you might expect from that, my dad was not a monster, and I would never see that side of him again. I often have said he was a cross between an absent-minded professor and a mad scientist. Really smart, no social skills. Later in life, he would become a recluse and an alcoholic, likely self-medicating for an undiagnosed bipolar or schizophrenic disorder, and he would die alone at 65. All of my extended family are Jehovah's Witnesses. And so when my parents got divorced, my mom was disfellowshipped, disowned by her entire family and all of her religious community. By sheer tenacity, she single-mommed life, having a 2- and a 4-year-old with absolutely no support at all. Life was stressful, hard, and when it got overwhelming, I learned that people melt down and let the mess run all over those closest to them. When I was 11, through an interesting and ordained experience, my mom would meet someone who would begin talking with her about God. This gifted Bible teacher was able to explain to her the disconnects between the Jehovah's Witness faith and true faith in God that would ultimately lead us to start going to church. I remember sitting in the empty sanctuary while my mom was at choir practice one Sunday and just praying, God, I don't think I understand all of this, but I know I want you most. It would be really nice if the story got all cleaned up and beautiful from there, but the reality is that the title Christian doesn't usually instantly change patterns. And hurt people still hurt people with behaviors they have yet to acknowledge or understand. When I was 13, my mom would get remarried. He brought 4 kids to our 2, and the joys of blending families began. With everything that was in me, I wanted that family to work. I wanted that normal. I wanted that stable. I wanted that connection. And so I learned to run interference, to help, to mediate, to advocate, and to worry about everybody else, trying to hold together a family that would ultimately devolve into the same patterns I had experienced before. They would divorce when I was 19, and I have never seen that stepfamily again. Being raised in the sort of mental, emotional, and relational chaos I experienced my first 20 years of life drove me to do everything I could to figure out how relationships worked. There had to be things you could do to make them work better. To that end, I started reading books like The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People when I was 15 years old, and I tried to get all the things right. From here, I can run on insanely like Paul did in Corinthians about all my Christian accolades. Never missed church, went to every event. I lived for summer camp, working there many, many summers. In fact, that's where Andy and I met. I went to a Christian college. I didn't drink till I was 35, didn't have sex before I was married. And though I can't say I didn't dance, I was a ballerina. I never went to a party or a club. I was the church's golden child, especially when I came back after college and brought my fiance with me. From there, we would jump into leading the youth group, starting a family, running the nursery, sitting on church commissions, teaching Sunday school classes, sitting on the church board that would ultimately lead to Andy becoming chairman of the church board at the age of 29. And then the church building would burn down. And then a year later, the senior pastor would be let go. Things got ugly, and the church split. And we would hang on for a number of years, hoping that healing would come, until one Sunday, I walked out of Sunday school class, headed for the bathroom, and I saw people I had loved forever, and all I wanted to do was cry. So I turned around and walked the other way, only to run into more people. And all I wanted to do was cry. So I jumped into the closest hiding spot, and I wept in a dark corner. I knew it was time to leave. And in so doing, I lost my third family. I was so hurt, so disappointed in people, and mad at God. I had thought A plus B equals C. A relationship with God plus doing all the things you were supposed to would equal a successful life, calm life, smooth life, painless life. I thought I had all the answers, so when it fell apart at church, I decided to throw myself into my job instead. I was an elementary school librarian, and I loved that job. It was the perfect job for everything about the phase of life I was in, especially with Andy being a teacher at the time. So I grew that job, and I made it bigger, and I did as much for the school as I could, trying to make myself as valuable as possible, until the school district came and said, well, if you have all this time to do all this other stuff, you have time to run 2 school libraries instead, essentially killing the job and increasing the stress of it tenfold. In the next year, in 2011, Andy would take his first job as a principal, and we decided to move to that town, setting off explosives within the dysfunctional dynamics of my family. That is also the fall when my dad unexpectedly passed away. My mom behaved badly, and my sister said she was done with all the family drama. I single-handedly packed up and unpacked an entire house while Andy dealt with the learning and newness of his job, and I helped a kindergartner and a 3rd grader transition to a new school community. I got to that end, all while dealing with the increased responsibilities of my job. I got to the end of that school year as a drill sergeant, stressed, overwhelmed, and melting down all over those closest to me. And I knew if we were not going to survive well if I did not leave my job. But in all respect to people who make that choice, I had never wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. And now I wasn't even going to be that. My kids were in school, their dad's school. God had removed everything I was trying to claim for myself. Everything I was using to get approval with. Everything I could find my value and my worth in, except Him. And in so doing, true healing could begin. You see, shame had driven my life for almost 40 years. Shame, by definition, is the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that you are flawed and therefore unworthy of love, connection, and belonging. The intensely painful feeling of believing that you are flawed and therefore unworthy of connection, love, and belonging. And I know at least half of the people in here know exactly how that feels. Shame is the stalker that whips you from behind even as you smile at the world. You stay silent because you think you are the only one this stalker follows. And so his voice grows louder and his power stronger. But God never uses the crushing words of shame to convict us. God always convicts us cleanly. You see, guilt is restorative. Guilt says, I did something wrong, and I'm willing to own it so that we can be reconciled back together again. Shame is destructive. It says, I am wrong. My very being is wrong, and I need to hide from you so that you can't see it. It drives us away from the very connection we long for. And shame grows in silence. It is only by sharing it that it loses its hold. One of the great turning points for this in my life came shortly after we had moved and Andy was into his job. Andy and I were having a conversation one night, and I was fussing at him, I'm sure, about something. And he said, frustratingly, he said, "Tabitha, I cannot love you enough to make up for the fact that you do not love yourself." Though he had been trying for many years, that was the first time I could hear that and truly understand. Because shame is something that we learn in relationships, it is also something that can only be healed in relationships. And so, since I had more time than I'd ever had before, I started going to counseling, which I did consistently for 7 years. Counseling allowed me to fully assimilate the thousands and thousands of hours of reading and studying I had done so that the learning and the healing could make it all the way through to my mental and emotional health. It allowed me to grieve what would never be, accept what was, and move forward into more wholehearted living. For much of my life, all the striving and the perfectionism had been about trying to prove that I was worthy of love, connection, and belonging. Only by stripping away all the things I was using to avoid standing naked before God did I find the true value, worth, and love He clothes us in. God is always faithful. He will redeem the pain of our lives if we trust Him with it. Thank you.